Hey, welcome everyone to GW4W's Wine and Tea Wednesdays. We hope you have a beverage of choice to enjoy with us for the next half hour. I am Mim Senft, CEO and co-founder of Global Women for Wellbeing, and I am delighted to be here again with my co-host and our newly elected board president, Shelly Chopra, who is also a principal at Lumina Health Partners. And she is also president of our sister nonprofit organization, International School of Story. And today we have a special guest and someone that I've been lucky enough to know for quite a few years now, Maggie Sue. Welcome, Maggie. Thank you for being with us today. Maggie is the Global Business Development, Amazon Managed Blockchain, Amazon Web Services. So that's a mouthful title. And she's also she's a FinTech Council member and former advisor to the Zappos family of companies. And really excited also to talk today about her being the co-founder of Gold House Collective. So wonderful to have you with us. And just for all our listeners, you are in the DC area.
I am, yes.
Yeah, wonderful. But I know you have been around and moved around quite a bit. And so we want to jump in and just ask you a little bit about all your diverse roles, and you've been in different industries over the course of your career. And, you know, as a women's leadership organization, we're always curious about, out of those experiences, what has most influenced you as a leader? And what's the advice you would have given yourself when you started out, if you could have?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, I grew up on the East Coast. I had a pretty traditional upbringing, and, you know, after college went into consulting and business and kind of had everything mapped out, and then went back to business school. And I took a bit of a detour going out to Las Vegas to work for Zappos. And I think in many ways that really was a fulcrum that changed the trajectory of where I was going. And I've learned a lot about leadership and work there. I think one of the biggest takeaways was the importance of purpose-driven work. And so one of the things we learned about at Zappos was a management concept called Holacracy, where a lot has been written about it. And essentially in Holacracy, you don't have a hierarchy of people. So you don't have traditional bosses and managers, but you have a hierarchy of work. So, you know, what is the work, what needs to be done? And that's all organized around purpose. Because, you know, if you have a bunch of people running around with no bosses, no one saying what to do, it's kind of chaotic, but if they're all aligned by the same purpose, then at least you know that they're all going in the right direction. So that was something that I really, that stuck with me, that I hadn't really thought about as much before that. And I think tied to that is the notion of having strong core values as a company, and really holding to those core values. And, you know, Amazon and Zappos both are known for Amazon leadership principles, Zappos the core values. I think both are pretty important.
Which is interesting. So how does that, I mean, before you went to Zappos, and I'm looking at this more through the female leadership perspective, mm-hmm. Did that influence you one way or another, and how you look at leadership in general, or how we start to look at the gender equity gap?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, you know, it shouldn't have an influence, but I think it does. I think there are opportunities, you know, a lot of companies I've seen where at the kind of junior entry levels, you have a 50-50 balance of male and females, and then that drops off. And the question is, you know, why is that? And I think there are a number of reasons that we can get into, but I think part of it is just their different leadership styles and understandings. And one of the things I loved about Zappos and Holacracy was that in meetings, they actually had an opportunity. There was space for every single person to go around and speak in the meeting. And this isn't necessarily a male-female thing, but more of an introvert-extrovert thing, where in a lot of meetings, they get dominated by certain people that, mm-hmm. you know, might talk. And so this actually, there's almost like a referee who can say, like, Mim, what do you have to say? Maggie, what do you have to say? And they hold the space. And I thought that was really interesting because there's actually a lot of research that shows when you get those diverse perspectives in, then you actually come out with better outcomes, which, seems to make sense, right?
Yeah.
Maggie, I'm so excited to talk to you. I've heard such great things about you from Mim, so I was really excited when I saw that you were able to take time to join us on the show. The journey as female leaders. I myself, I would want to call myself a recovering corporate executive. I think that's a term I've given myself now. But navigating the corporate world and the entrepreneurial world for over 2 decades, it's interesting as I reflect back as my own growth path as a female leader. And I think I would layer on top of it, not only my journey as a female leader, but then my journey as a young mom, mom with young kids, and navigating going back to work after having, I have 2 boys, going back there. And that was also the time my career was taking off. My career trajectory was on the hat. So navigating the leadership demands, the traditional leadership expectations. I am from healthcare tech, and the time I was having my kids, it was a very male dominated environment. So to make your space as a young female leader, one with young kids, while meeting the demands of that, as I reflect back, there are lessons learned. I'm curious to hear, how was your journey into motherhood? Mm-hmm. I understand you have a daughter, while you were navigating your career trajectory.
I mean, it's something that I'm actually really passionate about. I think I actually was working on this idea with some friends a while back around co-working spaces that are child friendly, because there was this wave of co-working spaces that were female friendly, but they still didn't enable that work-life, integration. And so I'll probably ramble a bit about this, but I think one point is around the traditional concept of work and FaceTime, and COVID's definitely changed that quite a bit, where people are just trying to survive and get by. But I do think that I've never been a believer, and this is, teams I've managed, it's not about sitting there and just, if you're not being productive, there's no reason that you have to be in at 8 and stay until 6 every day. And so I've managed mothers, and if, as long as you're clear about your expectations, there's school drop off at this time, I know you're going to get the work done some other time. And it also goes back to, I think people work best when they have appropriate amounts of energy. There's actually a research institute called the Human Performance Institute out of Johnson & Johnson. And they do a lot of this energy mapping. And so like, if it's midday and your brain is not functioning, like, don't just be there because you have to be there, go for a walk or, do something else. And so it's a long way of saying, I think a lot about, getting the work done when it makes sense for you. When I first went back after maternity, I was actually very overwhelmed, I think, just by like the new time demands and stresses, as well as sleep. I think if you can figure out your sleep, that's like half the battle, and then figure out your time. And because I'm a consultant, I did like a time mapping of like where my time was going. And like by default, you have more time going towards, your child and other things, and, pumping, breastfeeding, whatever that looks like. And so I did this whole breakdown, and my big insight was like, cooking a meal takes a very long time. So if I could just like order out maybe once every few days, that would save me X number of hours, which would allow me to, do something like that. And I think your time isn't your own, but it's really sad. There's been this research that says that when for every child a woman has, her pay goes down by 4%. And then vice versa, if it's the father, the male, his pay goes up by 6%. And they've controlled for like ramp back and everything, and it's just sheer perception, and it's because he's now more stable and has to provide, and that is so frustrating. And I think I will stop there for now.
Working mother, we bring it up all the time, and it's these cultural biases that don't get enough play, particularly around this. But I really appreciate just this whole discussion about how do we solve this problem? And I mean, there are other countries that have done a much better job around this for professional women, working women. And, I use this all the time, but truthfully, I refer people back to the movie 9 to 5. That movie is 40 years old, 40. And if you go back, I really encourage people to go back and watch this film. One, it's very funny. But two, I think there's also just a sadness for me that they're talking about that exact issue.
Wow.
And there's this whole, storyline in it about, putting in a daycare center there and doing this for women. And, and here we are. Most organizations still have not really come up with what I would consider to be adequate support, whether it's there at the workplace or within the community. So I think it's huge opportunity for all of us to, start to really talk about this so that we don't have these additional barriers.
I mean, it's fascinating because Patagonia has on-site daycare, and they've done studies and they have some insane retention. I think they said their retention rate is like 100%, but they almost wish it weren't because it seems like they made up that number. And they've done, let's say, like in terms of the cost benefit, they're break even, which is exactly, where you'd want to be. I would expect they could even lose money. When I was at Zappos, they were investigating doggy daycare, which I thought was quite funny because that was actually what the employees wanted, but also looking at childcare. And a lot of these companies, it's just still even the big tech companies don't really have it. They have backup care, they have backup options, but they just don't. And again, it's not a cost thing. Like if it's done right, the cost benefit analysis makes sense. So I really struggle. It's again, a passion that I have is how can we change that dynamic? And, these ramp back programs, like if there were a place where, I could go and have someone watch my child and be able to take that meeting, I'd probably be able to re-enter the workforce, from maternity sooner, or I'd be less distracted. Like there are ways of thinking about this that I just think our society, the US doesn't have parental leave. And it's insane to me.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, we talk about it that, yes, it impacts mothers, professional women the most. It increases their ability to come back to work, retention, all of that. But more and more, you're starting to see the voice of men, fathers come in there too. This issue is not just a female leadership, female professional retention issue. It is how we create the integration between family, right? It impacts males too. Perhaps a lesser percentage, but that voice is starting to get joined up. And I agree with you, baffles my mind. You look at the cost benefit analysis, there is a positive ROI on it in investing in that. Yet I think we are dealing with the cultural and perception barriers that still have to be overcome because we do not have as many female leaders in the top leadership roles to really influence that change, unfortunately. And it's a catch-22 for us. So we absolutely need to resolve this issue.
Well, and I would say from the benefits side, it is still amazing to me because there is the dependent care benefit, which is pre-tax dollars that you can put back. And it still floors me how few companies, like they don't know about it or they don't talk about it enough within their organization. And yet at least it's one step forward if you can at least put that piece in to kind of offset some of those costs. And it's just another place where things integrate because we always talk about, we talk about women in leadership and we talk about benefits design over here and HR policy over here, instead of more of this systems thinking approach where all of these pieces kind of work together. And if you pull this lever, it might actually help on the other side. But as you know, we're going to switch gears here a little bit, and I'm really excited to talk about Gold House Collective. I know that you're very passionate about this. And, we are very, very focused on voices from all backgrounds and how important that is, that this isn't just about gender equity. We have to honor diversity. We cannot be truly inclusive in our goal to close the gender equity gap if we don't honor each area of diversity. And so I know this was and I'm going to turn this over to you and let you tell the audience about Gold House Collective and some of the exciting things that you guys are doing.
Sure. So Gold House is a nonprofit collective of pioneering Asian founders, creatives, executives, really coming together to help accelerate our societal impact and also enhance our community, both in terms of mental and physical well-being. And so this ties us together, but the ways in which it manifests are pretty different. So our first initiative was Gold Open, and that was around essentially ensuring the box office success of Asian-led films. So our very first film we Gold Open was Crazy Rich Asians, which hopefully you've both seen.
Yes.
And we did Searching, Parasite more recently, and we're doing a big push around Mulan, which is coming out this weekend. And so it's been, you know, the reason we started with that is that, you know, by seeing yourself represented on the big screen and with Black Panther, Chadwick Boseman passing, and just I've been reading like how his presence has affected children and youth, and just that they could see themselves there. And it was just very meaningful, and that actually paved the way for Crazy Rich Asians. There's this amazing photo of the Black Panther cast and the Crazy Rich Asians cast all together that just really touches my heart. And then Shang-Chi, who's Simu Liu, who's playing Shang-Chi in Marvel, he wrote essentially a tribute that said like that's what paved the way. And similarly, we hope to do that for other communities too. But anyway, so that's one initiative. We also have Gold Rush, which helps essentially a founder accelerator. So think, you know, entrepreneurs, and we've done flash sales and other events. We have kind of this infrastructure to support Asian-owned businesses. We also have the A100 list, which is essentially an annual list of the most influential Asians, and includes athletes and entrepreneurs and business people. And it was really just, you know, and there's all sorts of other initiatives in the works, but there were no shortage of Asian organizations. There are, you know, lots and lots of Asian organizations, both in terms of ethnicity and industry and generation. And so when we were starting Gold House, people said, well, you're just going to be another one. Like what's the difference between this and anything else? And so one of the things we really focused on was kind of bringing together excellence from these different areas and having this kind of cross-cultural and cross-industry tie to solve problems that faced our people. So one of the most recent events we had was around for Pride Month, and it was around the experience of transitioning or coming out for Asian LGBTQ youth. And it ties very closely to mental health, which is a huge issue for our community. It's not talked about enough. And so that's something where we had a great just conversation around what that is and how you need support of the family and the community, and why that isn't being provided oftentimes today within our community.
Amazing.
Absolutely. You know, I love the idea. I was reading up on it before the call, and I love how, you know, Mim, I think I've heard you use this term, more good together. How do you pull in the power of all and sort of amplify the impact we can create collectively? And that's the first thing that resonated with me when I was reading about it. It's a great job that you guys are doing there.
Yeah, it's a team effort. It's been incredible to see the team grow.
Yeah, and I think now in particular, I just want to bring up, I know, Shelley, you are a huge advocate for talking about mental health. And we've talked about it through your culture and some of the barriers that are there. And so again, this is where it's the nuances of what you hear from culture to culture, but we're still addressing this huge issue. And particularly now during this pandemic, I mean, the research around how this is impacting mental health for everyone, it's a challenge, but again, I think it's a huge opportunity for all of us that are passionate about healthy leadership, not just successful leadership, but how do we show up as healthy leaders and destigmatizing mental health. And so we really applaud you for, you know, your voice around this. It's spot on for where we are in the world. And hopefully 5 years from now, we're coming back and we've made some positive steps forward. So
I think just to the point on mental health, one of the initiatives, kind of a beta test that we ran, was a directory of Asian therapists, because we realized that there were a few that we found, but just even having like in-language support or specific issues that were, you know, relevant, and that's East Asian, South Asian, you know, all sorts. And we offered that to our members. So we had about 10 therapists, mostly in the LA area, but elsewhere, and they were offering, you know, a free consultation or this or that. And it's been one of the most, you know, utilized resources that we've had. And even like Gold House staffers have come to me because we've offered it to them. And a lot of these are, you know, kind of out of college, a couple years out of college, and they're struggling with kind of how COVID affects things. And they're like, oh, I actually saw one, and I'm already talking to a few. And for them to be so open to that. And I think just like removing that first level, which I think was honestly, oh, I have to pay, right? We said, okay, well, the first session, is comped, and then you can see, because you can kind of, it's not everyone's going to be a fit for everyone. So letting them be able to speak to a lot of different people. And, one of our volunteers is now going with her mother. And she said there've been issues that they've had for, a while, that this was just this great opportunity. She had wanted to do it, but this was like that trigger. So we want to broaden that to the community. And we're working with ZenCare and a few other organizations to do that.
It's just it sounds so simple just to create a list of
exactly.
the cultural thing, but it is so impactful, Maggie. I can attest to that just from my personal experience. 3 years ago, I struggled with depression all my life, but coming from South Asian culture, we do not talk about it. And coming from a culture, I think this could be probably held true for Asian culture in general. Yes. We epitomize valor, right? Strength, resilience, that you can fight through it. Yet this is not something we choose. It's a clinical condition, which is what we just don't accept. There's just a great deal of shame. So when I was diagnosed with bipolar, I struggled with the stigma against that at many levels, cultural, shame and guilt. And I wanted to go look for therapists with similar background, somebody who could not only help me navigate it clinically, but also all other things I was dealing with. And you're so right, there was no resource for me to go and say, hey, what are those? So I Googled, I found it wasn't the right one. But, looking back, I mean, honestly, we don't have to solve big problems. Sometimes the solutions to big problems starts with a very small practical steps. So thank you for taking that. That in itself is a very impactful, and I'm sure you will, through partnerships with other local organizations, that impact can be amplified.
Yeah, I mean, it's, the chef, David Chang, just came out and said he has bipolar, I believe. And I was just reading about that. And that was pretty incredible to hear his journey. And we've actually thought about, because we have so many musicians involved, we've thought about almost like tricking people into going to talking about mental health, but by inviting them to a concert, right? And using that as like a gateway for the conversation. And how do we, destigmatize just the conversation? And so it's lots of ideas. Would actually love, to continue the conversation.
Oh, I would be happy to have this conversation offline as well. Very passionate, very involved in local organizations, so would love to do that.
100%. But hold on one second, because I also want to share, because it's specifically along these lines. So Nancy Board, the co-founder of Global Women for Wellbeing, has been in the mental health field forever, her entire career. And one of the things that they've accomplished for the EAP that she works for, when she started with them, only 2% of providers through the EAP or mental health services providers were from diversity backgrounds.
Wow.
She's now gotten it to over 20%. And so when we're looking at that in the context of Black Lives Matter, I've heard this from that community as well. And so I think the other thing too is that there are actual legal ramifications for businesses. They probably don't want to hear this, and their lawyers don't want to hear this, but we're here to talk about real health. And so it is important that when you're looking at those kinds of providers in your organizations, that they are meeting the needs of your workforce. So this is another D&I issue that we don't necessarily connect back to health and well-being, or these two silos need to be coming together, particularly right now for this conversation. So it's interesting that, again, it shows up in different cultures in different ways, but it's still mental health. And so the nuance is about how you make sure you have the right providers and the right messaging, and dealing with the stigma is new territory, I'm sure, for a lot of organizations, but absolutely necessary now.
Yes, absolutely. Boy, certainly we all are very passionate about this mental health topic, and I feel we could have almost one session just dedicated to this, or maybe even more offline conversations. But in interest of time, because this half an hour passes by so quickly, just real quick, Maggie, with your diverse leadership experience, you having worked with many organizations, what are some of the key things organizations should be looking at to better support gender equity or gender balance not just at senior leadership level, really at all levels in the organization. Just any final thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to, I think there's like a cultural, like our society cultural issue, but within any organization, it's, you know, individual actions add up, and an organization's culture is the sum of like micro moments in every single interaction. So I think it's, you know, I know training's important. I feel, I get frustrated because I don't like going to training. Like I think training that's tied to kind of practical, something more practical, and also, you know, seeing actions outside of that. So, you know, I think that the training is important, but also having leaders and peers that model behaviors that are respectful. It's funny, when I came back from maternity leave, a male colleague said, "How was your vacation?" And I kind of looked at him and
I got asked the same. I was like, I wish it was. It really was not.
So, I mean, that might need some training, but I think just having that awareness, and respecting the diversity of perspective and insights and where people are coming from, both on the gender side as well as in other areas.
Wonderful. Well, great. Well, you know, as Shelley said, it always goes way too fast. And this was such a wonderful conversation. Thank you for being with us, Maggie.
Thanks for having me.
As we always do, we want to raise a glass and toast to a healthier, more inclusive, more sustainable future for all of us.
Here, here.
Thank you.
And we invite everybody to join us again next week for Wine and Tea Wednesdays. Whew, it's been a long day for me. We're really excited to have our GW4W member, Karen Detchi. She is the CEO and founder of Fabric. And it is a people consulting practice. Now, full disclosure, I've known Karen also for a long time. Prior to founding Fabric, she served in senior HR roles, including the Chief Talent Officer for Tory Burch. She's just an amazing voice around looking at some of these issues through an HR lens. And if you haven't already, we invite you to connect with us through our website, gw4w.org, on our LinkedIn page, our YouTube channel. And as always, if you need support, mental health, have an issue and need somebody to listen to you or get you to the right resource, please call us. We are happy to get you connected. You are not alone. You really aren't. We are all here together, and not just through GW4W, but through our greater network. So we want to also remind you to raise a glass and remember that great minds
sit together.
We will see you next
Cheers.
week. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Okay.